It is time for the ultimate kick. The House settlement has been finalized. College athletics has been changed forever with the approval of the House versus NCAA settlement, which occurred on Friday. Beginning on July 1st, 2025, schools will begin revenue sharing with their own athletes. The current cap on that revenue is $20.5 million for all sports, but that cap increases by at least 4% each year during the 10-year agreement. But for more on this settlement, there's really only one person to talk to. Let's hear from 24/7 Sports national analyst Chris Hummer.
It's a sweeping settlement that changes the way college athletics will operate. Moving forward, there are new roster caps. There will be an NIL enforcement mechanism. Most importantly, perhaps, there's now revenue sharing where schools will distribute $20.5 million annually to their athletes, especially on the Power Four level. $14 to $16 million of that is expected to go to football. You might think that sounds like professional athletics, and in a way it is, but there are just two things missing that leave the landscape of college athletics in a really unstable position. One, the NCAA still lacks an antitrust exemption, and two, athletes are not employees. And that leaves the doors open to many, many more lawsuits. Lawsuits have changed the way college athletics is operated over the last decade, starting with the Ed O'Bannon trial and potentially ending here with the House settlement. And moving forward, I think you're going to see lawsuits and challenges in the courts over fair market value in terms of compensation with NIL and the NIL Go program that's set to determine fair market value. You might see challenges over Title IX. You might see challenges over roster caps. You might see challenges from the states themselves, as several states have laws on the books that directly contradict the ruling of the new House settlement. So there's a lot of uncertainty in college athletics, despite the stability that the House settlement was supposed to bring. And I think this is a huge step for college athletics in a lot of ways, but there are still many shaky days and a lot of billable hours ahead for the sport as it tries to navigate this new landscape of not quite professional athletics.
Great stuff from Chris, as always. But Brad, everything you've gathered on your own, everything you heard from Chris, what are some of your takeaways?
This is long overdue, Tom, in college football. I think it also evens the playing field just a bit now that every power program moving forward is going to have access to, at minimum, 16 and a half or so million dollars a year to build its own football roster. I mean, you're still going to have elite programs surpassing that total every year. We've seen the estimated totals at Texas and Ohio State, but the recent trend of five stars being more evenly dispersed every recruiting cycle, that's going to continue. We've seen programs like Georgia Tech, Texas Tech, programs that have never signed five stars previously, all of a sudden entering that table conversation. So the days of Georgia, LSU, Alabama, for instance, signing 5 or 6 five stars every cycle, that's over with.
Yeah, Brad, I don't know if you're over with is exactly what we'll say with those schools doing that. I still believe it's gonna happen. Like, parity is not something that's going to be easily become something that we could do overnight. Because at the end of the day, the rich is always going to continue to get richer. And everybody else that's below the rich is going to stay that way. Because one of the things that I got from Chris Hummer was there's a collective bargaining agreement, Brad, that does not have there's a cap number without any collective bargaining agreement. That means none of the players agreed to this. So you put a number and a cap on a particular group of people without them understanding what their agreement is, or did they even agree to anything? So, Brad, my question is, yes, parity, but who's creating this parity?
I think the money is. I mean, you look at NIL collectives, there's so much red tape now that there wasn't before. Everything is over the table now. And what that means is with this new NCAA enforcement arm looking at basically every NIL deal valued at, what is it, $600 or more? Chris Hummer earlier in the segment mentioned fair market value. How is that going to be determined? NIL is not going to end, but with schools now able to pay these players directly, the impact of these outside deals that are, brokered away from the realms of like a player contract, those are going to diminish. So I think there's several NIL employees at various elite programs right now sweating a little bit because those jobs, man, may end here in the near future.
Well, Brad, you and I both know, we talked about it earlier, the main reason for going to the salary cap outlook of college sports in itself is to remove the collective from it, to remove the boosters from it. Because the days of having a collective being able to be a resource towards funding the schools that we're talking about, the top 5 schools, they're removing that from it. The days of having a booster, having a big-time company saying, you know what, I want to give Tom Lloyd a $2 million deal, but we're only going to pay him $50,000 from our own allotment. Those days are being removed. So there's where personnel is coming into charge. That's where your general manager is there to now structure the proper deals. So the schools that don't have that general manager, that don't have that salary cap type structure, they might be behind the times, Tom.
I'm just kind of curious, when you bring up general manager to the casual college football fan, if they see their school doesn't have a general manager, you see that they have a director of player personnel or they have a chief of staff, I mean, is title important, and how important is it to really have somebody in that general manager role?
Well, it's ultra important when you're talking about the current market that we're in, Brad, because the teams that don't have one typically only go in one phase. And I always say there's 3 phases of what we are considering now in college athletics for general managers. You have the recruiter, the one that understood how to get on the phone and put together a list to get players in front of coaches. Then you had the evaluator, the one that was stuck in the room, just knocking out film, doing a whole bunch of reports, and could put a board together. Then you had the salary cap guy that's now just come into play in the last couple of years, that understand the structure of what you have in your collective now to allocate those funds out to those players. But if you don't have a unicorn, which I would say, which is all 3 of those, then you're in a tough situation. Because now each department is going to have to go out now and have 3 separate entities trying to work together. So, Brad, we know that it's ultra important to move forward right now. Because
you mentioned that third role being like the banker of sorts for every program, trying to figure out these salaries and, of that $16.5 million each year, how much is my quarterback getting? How much am I paying each defensive end? You have to fund your 2 deep as well. So you've got to have justifiable, solid talent on the second team in case some of them guys get injured. So it's a very interesting new era in college football. As a money guy myself, I kind of like the idea of having someone in charge at each major program of how much we're earmarking for certain positions, because obviously a quarterback is worth more than, say, a starting cornerback.
All of this is kind of interesting because you have somebody, getting that GM title, like a Chad Bowden at USC. But then you have somebody that I know does it all down in Georgia, like Will Myers. So I'm just kind of, I don't know. I don't think that the title really matters as much, but I am kind of curious, Brad, and I'll start with you because I'm curious from both of you guys, especially Smoke with your experience. But Brad, the on-field experience, do you think with this kicking off in July, do you think it's going to impact what we see come August, September in this season?
I don't think we see the biggest impact happening, Tom, this season on the field, but certainly when the early signing period begins in December, we're going to see major changes. And then eventually how rosters look in 2026 from spring practice when you kind of get those guys for the first time and then beyond. For the most part, teams already have their 2 deeps signed, for instance, this fall, but player retention after this season is going to be a lot more advantageous for programs that are trying to hold on to their top talent when the transfer portal opens and that sort of thing around Christmas, because of this revenue share now and the ability for schools to pay talent directly. There are several programs, Tom, in the SEC that aren't, perennial top 10 programs that had to open their checkbooks last season to retain starting quarterback, edge rushers, and those kind of things. And I think moving forward, that's going to be easier now to retain some of your best players.
Brad, most guys that I've talked to in the personnel world, they've done a really good job of front-loading a bunch of these contracts, meaning they paid out a lot of these guys already. So they're anticipating the July 1st hitting to where those big numbers, and where we're saying 3X, 5X in some programs, it wouldn't truly affect what your cap value is going to be on this season. But there's some other teams that didn't anticipate it because no one really knew if this was going to be in play for this year or next year. So at the end of the day, there's some big numbers out there, Brad, that a lot of these teams aren't going to be able to cover. So when this transfer portal hit in December, you're going to see some names of some players, I believe, that's going to be out there looking for a new home. And their market value is now being corrected by what we're seeing now in terms of the cap. Because if you're getting paid $4 million in the old cap and it's now retroactive to this cap, and you only have $16 million, well, that number doesn't add up if the production isn't there and it's for one player.
I want to jump in here. We do have a lively chat going on right now, and I got this tossed in by the producer. But LL tossed in the chat, are the players employees of the university now? Brad, start with you, man.
I mean, I think they are. We can throw out the term student athlete. That's been extinct, for half a decade now. But officially, the phrase amateurism is dead. It rings true here in June. I mean, this is what the results of this House settlement realize now. These are semi-pro athletes, professional athletes, call them what you want, but all these guys within the two deep at Power 4 programs are getting paid some monetary figure, and that just ends amateurism, in my opinion.
Yeah, Brad, I'm going to say no. I don't think you're an employee, because if you're an employee, most employees have unions, and you don't.
No.
CBAs, you don't. They're just getting paid basically 1099. Like, you see what I'm saying? So they're not truly employees of the university. They're just contracted independent workers for that 6 months or that calendar year, and they can get up and leave and go somewhere else.
So they're at-will employees, essentially.
At the end of the day.
Well said, Brad. I know we have some burning questions at the top of the show sometimes at the bottom. How about right now from Caniac Crazy 98? We got Hear Me Out. With kids getting paid by schools, what is the chance someone stays and plays college football forever? It's being set up as minor leagues anyway. Huh. Thoughts?
Yeah, you come to me first for that, Brad. Yeah, they're not going to be in there forever.
Yeah.
For the simple fact, because even though it looks like some guys are sticking around for 9 or 10 years, once you get into school, your clock starts.
Right.
You got 5 years to get out of there. If you do have an injury, medical max 6, because we're not looking at the pandemic anymore for the results of those guys, or we're not going to the formula of the
6
JUCO.
seems low as of late, though. I've seen some 7, 8. I mean, it's yeah.
That because of the pandemic and the whole entire JUCO format that's thrown in there. But I can see where a lot of players are prolonging their college careers. And talking to some of my NFL scouts, general managers, and guys within that world, guys aren't really that anxious to go play to play in the NFL, because they're getting paid a lot of money.
Just to leave college in general.
Just in
they
general.
may not have an NFL future.
No.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Tom, if you look at it, Brad, if I'm in college and I'm getting $1 million and I'm getting my housing taken care of, all my meals taken care of, and I have a car, if I turn pro and I'm getting my base minimum is $875,000, I'm getting taxed on that 45%. I have to find my own place to live. I have to take care of my own food. So at the end of the day, I'm losing money going to the pros rather than staying in college with the understanding that I might have an opportunity to get drafted in the second or third round if I increase my production, if I increase my pay. So for a college athlete, I'm saying, hey, listen, I'm going to play the long game. The long game is to get the for sure money right now that's college, rather than go to the NFL and having to take up adult responsibilities.
Yeah, if I'm not a projected day one pick in the ensuing NFL draft, I'm telling the agent or my family or whoever is representing me to my university, I'm staying in school. Find me a new program for my final season. One where I can start, better my draft stock, and make more money. We saw last year there were several quarterbacks, I won't mention names, that came out who got drafted on day 3 who might have been better off using another year or two of eligibility to make a higher payday. Now, we've seen coaches say, you want to keep your legacy and that sort of thing. I don't know if all that's going to continue in college football with the way we're headed. When guys, like you said, Smoke and Tom, you can make more money still playing in college football than you can being a late NFL draft pick.
I mean, I'll say it. You clearly there was a lot of chatter around Quinn Ewers. Should he come up?
Yeah.
Should he go pro? Should he stay in college? There was this multi-million-dollar offer from Notre Dame, supposedly, that was on the table. People around the program denied it. I'm pretty sure it was happening, but I think it's all up for debate. But we did have another comment. I wouldn't call it a question back on our YouTube page, but it's Andrew says, I want to see one-time transfers. After that, you are SOL. What's your take on, Brad, I'll start with you. What's your take on, should they just be limited to one, or can they have multiple at this point?
I think if we're going to limit players to one, we should limit coaches to one, right? But that's not going to happen. What we really need to figure out NCAA wise, whoever's running the show there in Indianapolis is
No idea.
we need to determine, what eligibility is in college football. Do you get 4 years and then you get one medical red shirt? Do you have to sit out a year after you transfer? Should you be immediately eligible? I mean, what kind of penalties are involved? We've got so many guys now that are vying for a 7th and 8th year of college football because the rules are so gray. We need to figure out, what is this? You have 5 to play 4 type thing, and set it in stone so that we don't have all this bureaucratic nonsense and then lawyers getting involved with players trying to extend their careers.
Brad, when you talk about just rules and laws, then you have to go all the way back to, why do we create this salary cap? And is there a collective bargaining agreement? Because if you're only allowing me as a player to transfer one time, you're limiting my opportunities to earn as much as I possibly can. Because on the open market, if I'm worth 3 times as much than staying at University A, I should be able to have that opportunity to go.
Absolutely.
And if the salary cap or the revenue cap or whatever word that they want to use goes up a percentage each year, then a player should be able to go out and negotiate on the free market or in-house to be able to get paid or compensated as much as possible if the revenue sharing always goes up and increases.
But how many multi-time transfers are actually going to get 3 or 4X at their third stop? I mean, I can kind of count on one hand how many guys have actually played at a 3rd or 4th school and been a dominant player. So I think it's not a red herring, but you have to think about, Smoke, how much of these guys actually, when they're on their multiple 3rd or 4th transfer, are making an impact at these programs.
I mean, you're going pro after the 2nd stop. Like if you're doing that well, there's really no point for the 3rd. Like, so it doesn't really, they're not going to get financially compensated that strong if they need to go for a 3rd stop.
But both of you guys are saying both of those theories are outliers, right? But what the NCAA has done and what most rules have done, Brad, is put everybody in a box.
Yeah.
And I think you can't do that because there's always a one-off. And if there is a one-off, then that's where we start ending up again in courts, in the lawsuits. If you just make it a rule and abide by it and live by it, I think you'll get to what you want because like you both said, there are only a handful of guys that are even good enough or willing to leave school A, B, or C.
Right.
But there are some guys that just got picked. There's one guy that we can talk about right now, the 1st overall pick, that went to 3 schools and leveled up pretty well. So if you take that away from a young man like that, does he get the opportunity to be the 1st overall draft pick in an NFL draft?
I mean, no argument with that. I mean, obviously Cam Ward is a different situation. Pick number 1 of the Titans. All you Nashvillians are fired up about. I think he's a special talent. But I do want to move on to one more comment here from the YouTube. Clearly, that thing is buzzing right now. It kind of fires me up. But we got a question from Home Squad Sports. Will we see some P5 programs implement JV teams filled with mostly high school recruits to develop? Brad?
It's funny you say that. Oklahoma a few weeks ago took Mercer starting quarterback for probably pennies on the dollar to be the backup quarterback to John Mateer, yet Mercer couldn't afford him anymore. That's essentially a JV player right there, right? That's the kind of stuff that I think new college football, I guess, messes up fans' minds and as far as wanting to follow this sport, because you have a star at a small program like Mercer who took just a little bit more money to go to Oklahoma where he's never going to see the field unless something happens to the guys in front of him. So we're not going to see JV teams or that kind of thing. But I mean, it's a fair question though, especially with this new era.
Great question. Here's the answer. Right? There's a JV already. It's called the Group of 5. Right? The
Ouch.
P4 schools are using the G5 schools and FCS programs as your JV. So it's already created within our market. Because most of those prospects, they aren't getting compensated as much as the P4 schools are giving their players. So I, as a general manager at Maryland, would always look Division II, Division I AA, Division III.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my feeder system. And if you're doing it right, you find ways to get the best, level them up, pay them pennies on a dollar, because they're getting nothing anyway. And get them up to your level. Now you're going to get the best bang for your buck. And again, we're in an operating world of a salary cap. If I can get a starting offensive lineman from an FCS school that I'm only paying $200,000, while somebody else is paying $2 million for a freshman coming into college that's not going to play for 2 or 3 years, yeah, that general manager should get fired, because you're paying for someone that does not have immediate impact. If they got to sit down and not play for 2 years, Brad, you're losing $4 million a year.
Seat holder. Yeah.
While I just sat and leveled up and got a $200,000 player starting at right or left tackle that's going to play the best for me. So I think that question probed, what are you going to do now? Are you going to create a high school salary cap and put a cap on it? Because the freshman cap is the one that throws everything off. Everything in-house can be taken care of because we're judging on production and performance. High school players, you're judging on projection and potential, which potential and projection gets most good guys moving with a big truck, and you're putting up a for sale sign in front of your house.
Brad, I did want to ask you one more quick question, and Smoke, if you want to chime in, please do. But is there any negative to just letting schools spend as much as they want, report everything, just be transparent? I'm not really sure who would have lost in that situation.
I think in that situation, I mean, the whole parity argument goes out the window then, because then you're going to have the programs who just print money with, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year, fielding the best rosters. We saw last season, Ross Bork, the AD at Ohio State, came out and said publicly, we had the most expensive roster in college football. What was estimated, 20 million or so? And now Texas has a $40 million roster. I know Sark says that's not true, but that's been the reported number. So just in 2 years, 2 cycles, Tom, we've seen the most expensive roster in college football almost double. Imagine what it's going to look like 5 years from now.
Brad, Tom, the question you should ask is what we've been living through in college sports until this weekend and moving forward. Like, the rich stays rich. The ones that can print money, the ones that got oil money, the ones that can have 3 or 4 misses on whatever star that we want to give them and still operate in that world, yeah, that's what college football and college sports has been this entire time.
If I'm a small school, I'm taking that as a challenge, Brad, and I'm going to spend as much as possible to bring a natty to my school.
But Tom, you don't got the money.
Ball factor,
it don't matter.
There might be a big booster somewhere at a small school that says, you know what, Smoke, I'm coming.
They should have ponied up a long time ago.
All right, let's move on.
Beast,
go ahead.
Mr. Beast could afford to give $100 million to East Carolina.
There it is. There it is.
Football playoff team, okay?
Perfect example. Mr. Beast, sign up.